I have a friend who considers me his best friend. And I can't stand him, I just don't want to offend him. But he suffocates me with his presence. I have a friend who thinks I'm his best friend, but the truth is, I can't stand him, and I've been lying to him for years. It all started in college during orientation week. He was funny, charming, and the kind of person who naturally drew everyone to him, while I was quiet and preferred to stay in the background. Somehow, he latched onto me immediately, convinced that we were destined to be inseparable. At first, I went along with it, thinking it was harmless. But soon, it became suffocating. He called me multiple times a day, dragged me to events I didn't want to attend, and constantly needed validation. I started dodging him, hoping he would give me space, but nothing worked. He always found a way to invade my life, and every interaction became exhausting. The first time I realized how bad it had gotten was during our junior year. He invited me on a weekend trip with his friends. I agreed, thinking it would be fine, but within 2 hours I was trapped in a minivan with him singing loudly to every song, sharing every thought that popped into his head, and giving me this intense, "Look at me, aren't I amazing?" stare. I laughed, nodded, tried to disappear into my phone, but nothing worked. My social anxiety skyrocketed, and I began imagining ways to escape. That's when I started inventing small lies, pretending to have family obligations, fabricating work emergencies, even faking illnesses. At first, I felt guilty. I hated lying, but telling him the truth felt cruel. Some moments were actually funny. Like the time I told him my cousin's wedding was next weekend, only to realize I had mixed up the dates and the wedding was actually a month later. I had to create an elaborate fake schedule to cover it up, and somehow, he believed it. Every lie became a trap I had to maintain, and I constantly feared slipping up. The breaking point came last summer when he insisted I help him organize a massive birthday party for himself, complete with a rented hall, catering, decorations, and a guest list full of people I didn't know, or even like. I spent 2 weeks pretending to be excited, designing invites, and secretly wishing I could vanish. On the day of the party, I put on a forced smile, watched him soak up all the attention, and realized that saying no was not an option. So, I faked a sudden food allergy that acted up mid-party, and spent most of the night hiding in the bathroom with an antihistamine, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. No one suspects anything. He still believes I'm his best friend, and I keep up the act, wondering how much longer I can. Have you ever had to fake friendship just to survive someone's constant attention? Would you have told him the truth, or kept lying like I did? After that disastrous birthday party, I thought things might settle down. I was wrong. If anything, he became even more attached, and I started noticing patterns in his behavior that made me question my own sanity. He wasn't just clingy, he was obsessive in ways that I could never have imagined when we first met. For example, he began showing up at places I regularly went without telling me he'd be there, always pretending it was a coincidence. Once, I was at a small bookstore, quietly browsing in a corner, and I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there he was, holding a coffee cup with my name misspelled on it, grinning like he had just won a trophy. I froze. I tried to laugh it off, saying, "What a small world." But inside, panic was bubbling up. This was becoming too much, yet I couldn't bring myself to push him away completely. I felt trapped in politeness, guilt, and fear of confrontation. I started developing strategies to manage him, which I now realize were borderline ridiculous. I had an elaborate system of fake excuses, spontaneous errands, and invented personal obligations that I would rotate so he wouldn't notice a pattern. If he texted me at 10 a.m., I would sometimes reply with a 5-minute delay, claiming I was at a meeting. If he wanted to hang out, I'd suddenly remember a dentist appointment, a cousin visiting, or a delivery that needed my signature. It got to the point where I kept a digital calendar entirely devoted to lies. Each entry was color-coded based on the type of excuse: work, family, or health. Some nights, I would lie in bed, scrolling through my phone, carefully editing old messages so that any potential slip-ups would be covered. I became a master of deception in mundane, micro ways, and I hated myself for it. One of the funniest yet most humiliating episodes happened during a movie night. He insisted we watch a new blockbuster, and naturally, he invited about 10 people I barely knew. I reluctantly agreed because I thought refusing would cause a scene. I arrived, sat quietly in the back, trying to blend into the darkness, and within 5 minutes, he had plopped down next to me with his arm over my shoulder like we were soulmates. He whispered, "Isn't this perfect? I'm so glad we're doing this together." I forced a smile and nodded. Halfway through the movie, he started narrating every scene out loud, commenting on every actor's performance, and asking for my opinion on things I didn't care about. I mumbled something polite, hoping he would get distracted. Nope. He leaned closer, grabbed my arm, and whispered dramatically, "You and I always understand each other, don't we?" I could barely contain my panic. I laughed nervously and looked around for an escape route, but everyone else was either engrossed in the movie or intimidated by his energy. I sat there, pretending to enjoy the movie, while silently plotting my escape strategy. By the end, my neck was stiff, my stomach hurt from trying to hold back groans, and I swore I would never sit through another event like that. Yet somehow, I still agreed to his next plan because I couldn't bring myself to say no. Then came the day he asked me to be his wingman at a speed dating event. I don't even like speed dating. He argued it would be fun, and I, in my weak-willed attempt to avoid confrontation, said yes. That evening, I found myself dressed in a way I didn't like, rehearsing lines I would never actually use, and mentally preparing for embarrassment on a grand scale. He was ecstatic, bouncing around the venue, introducing me to strangers as his best friend, while I silently prayed for an exit. At one point, he cornered me and whispered, "You're my favorite person here. Promise me you'll stay close." I nodded mutely, feeling my face heat up in shame and discomfort. I wanted to shout, "I don't want to be here with you." But somehow, the words would never come out. The pinnacle of absurdity, however, occurred during a friends group camping trip he organized. I thought it would be a simple outdoor adventure, but it turned into a logistical nightmare. He packed everything obsessively, created a daily itinerary for us, and even assigned roles. I was the morale officer, which meant I had to cheer up everyone whenever spirits dipped, regardless of how I felt. On the first night, as we sat around the campfire, he regaled everyone with exaggerated stories of our past adventures. Stories that were partly true, partly fictional, and all manipulated to make him look heroic and me like his loyal sidekick. At one point, he handed me a marshmallow on a stick and said, "You know, I couldn't do this without you. You're literally the best friend anyone could ask for." I forced a laugh, my hand trembling slightly as I took the marshmallow. Later, when he finally fell asleep, I lay in my tent, staring at the canvas roof, feeling a mix of shame, frustration, and disbelief at how far I had let this go. Even now, months later, he still believes I am his unwavering best friend. I attend his events, smile at his jokes, and participate in his elaborate plans, all while secretly counting the days until I might finally have the courage to tell him the truth. The irony is that he considers me a confidant, someone he trusts above everyone else, and I have built an entire double life around this friendship. I'm exhausted but also strangely proud of my ability to navigate this bizarre social maze. It's a mix of guilt, fear, and dark humor that keeps me awake at night. I sometimes wonder if he suspects anything, but every time I catch his hopeful, trusting smile, I know that for now, my secret is safe. Have you ever been trapped in a friendship like this, where politeness, guilt, and fear forced you to lie constantly? Would you have managed it like I did, or would you have confronted the truth long ago? It's strange how a friendship that starts out seemingly normal can twist into something so suffocating. By the time our junior year was over, I realized that my life had become a series of performances, all tailored to maintain the illusion of being his best friend. I wasn't exaggerating when I say that he had started to weave me into every aspect of his life, whether I wanted to be involved or not. There was the time he convinced me to join him in a volunteer project, something I normally would never have considered. He made it sound noble, like we were saving the world together. In reality, it was a long day of hauling boxes and directing confused people, and I spent the entire time silently wishing I could disappear into the storage room. He, of course, loved every second, turning every small success into a celebration, repeatedly saying, "I couldn't do this without you." My response was always the same, a polite nod and a tight-lipped smile, while my soul slowly withered inside. Then came the infamous karaoke night. He had been talking about it for weeks, practically begging me to participate. I don't do karaoke. I can't sing. But apparently, none of that mattered. He had already convinced half our group that we were performing a duet, and there was no backing out. On the night itself, I showed up, nervous, hoping the alcohol might make things bearable. As soon as our song started, he grabbed the microphone, beaming like he'd won the lottery, and I was pulled along for the ride. I mumbled through the lyrics, my voice cracking embarrassingly, while he belted out his lines with the enthusiasm of someone auditioning for a Broadway show. People clapped and cheered, and I smiled through the pain, trying to look like I was enjoying myself. Afterwards, he hugged me, laughing and saying, "We crushed it. You were amazing." I wanted to crawl under the stage and never emerge. That night, I learned that there was no situation he wouldn't drag me into, and no skill I didn't have to fake in order to survive our friendship. The next few months were a blur of similar incidents. He would plan surprise trips, assign me roles in group projects, and constantly create memorable experiences that were exhausting to endure. He texted incessantly, often sending long dramatic messages about how much our friendship meant to him. I would stare at my phone, wondering how to respond without offending him, sometimes crafting replies that took longer to write than the actual messages themselves. It became a full-time job pretending to care in exactly the right way. I started keeping notes, digital files titled things like excuse inventory and mood management strategies, just to track which lie had been used when, and what storylines I had to maintain. Looking back, it sounds absurd, but at the time, it felt necessary for my survival. The peak of this madness happened one evening when he decided we should go to a haunted house attraction together. Alone, this might have been manageable, but he insisted on inviting a dozen people, most of whom I barely knew. As we queued outside, he held my hand, yes, literally, and whispered, "We'll face everything together. You and me against the world." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Inside the haunted house, every scare was followed by him clutching me, pointing out scary details that I had no interest in, and whispering exaggerated accounts of how brave we were being together. By the time we exited, my heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty, and I had developed a newfound appreciation for literally anything that did not involve him. Yet, in the group photo afterward, I smiled as if this had been the most fun night of my life. Around this time, I began noticing little inconsistencies in his stories, things that made me suspect he was oblivious to the chaos he caused but also deeply insecure. He would often ask for validation, fishing for compliments or reassurances in the most awkward ways. Sometimes I found it hilarious, the way he would dramatically sigh after a minor disagreement, or the exaggeratedly disappointed look when I didn't immediately respond to his texts. But other times, I felt a pang of guilt. I was laughing at someone who genuinely valued me, someone who thought of me as indispensable, and yet I could barely stand being near him for more than an hour at a time. The internal conflict was maddening. One night, things reached a surreal level. He called me at 2 a.m., panicked, because he had misplaced his phone charger. I groggily answered, and he started describing the precise locations he had already checked. I tried to stay patient, thinking he would eventually find it, but 30 minutes later he was still talking, detailing every corner of his room, his drawers, and even the snacks he kept near his desk. I was exhausted, frustrated, and simultaneously amused. By the end of the call, I had mapped out a mental plan for how to escape his constant presence without actually confronting him. This was becoming a pattern. I had to endure, adapt, and invent creative lies just to get a few moments of peace. Even though it was overwhelming, I couldn't deny that some moments were strangely endearing. There were times when he would do something unexpectedly thoughtful, like remembering a small detail I had mentioned months ago, or bringing me a coffee exactly how I liked it without asking. In those fleeting seconds, I almost felt like a good friend should, genuinely appreciated, valued, and included. But it never lasted. The next interaction would bring another chaotic adventure, another over-the-top display of his obsession with friendship. I was trapped in a cycle of small joys followed by overwhelming frustration, and it was exhausting beyond words. Despite all of this, he had no idea of the internal struggle I faced. He believed in me as his unwavering partner in crime, his confidant, and his safe space. And I had become a master of deception. Every laugh, every nod, every shared experience was carefully calculated to maintain the illusion. It was both humiliating and strangely thrilling, like walking a tightrope above a pit of social anxiety and shame. Sometimes I wondered how much longer I could sustain it, and whether he would ever notice, but for now, the secret remained mine alone. Have you ever been in a friendship where you had to hide your true feelings just to keep the peace? Would you continue the charade, or finally tell the truth and risk losing the person entirely? It all started to spiral out of control during what he called our ultimate weekend adventure. He had spent weeks planning it, sending me cryptic messages every day about how life-changing it would be, and I, of course, pretended to be thrilled. The plan was supposedly simple: a road trip to a nearby lake, camping, hiking, and bonding with a group of mutual friends. In reality, it turned into one of the most exhausting and absurd experiences of my life. He packed like he was preparing for a survival show, with a backpack bigger than mine, and insisted I carry half of his supplies because he trusted me more than anyone else. I tried to protest, but he gave me that wide-eyed puppy dog expression that made it impossible to say no without feeling like a villain. On the first day, things seemed tolerable. We drove along the highway, he sang along to every song on the radio at full volume, and I smiled politely, pretending to enjoy his choice in music. Halfway there, however, he suddenly declared a detour. "Trust me," he said, "this spot is incredible. No one else knows about it." 2 hours later, we ended up on a bumpy dirt road with no signs of civilization. My phone had zero signal, and I realized he had no GPS, only a printed map from who knows when. I tried to hint that maybe we should turn back, but he laughed and said, "Adventure is about embracing the unknown. You'll thank me later." I wasn't so sure. When we finally reached the lake, he insisted on setting up the campsite immediately, and not just anywhere, but at the most inconvenient spot imaginable. Steep incline, rocks, mosquitoes everywhere. He assigned me the tent job, which I understood as building the largest tent by myself while he supervised and offered unsolicited advice every 2 seconds. At some point he leaned over and said, "You know, I don't know what I'd do without you. You're literally my right hand in everything." I nodded, sweating and swatting mosquitoes, while silently questioning how I had ended up in this role as his personal assistant/best friend. That night, around the campfire, he unveiled the bonding activity he had meticulously planned. A storytelling game where everyone shared a secret from their life. I was exhausted, sticky, and emotionally drained, but I smiled, ready to endure it. People began sharing, and the mood was surprisingly light. When it came to his turn, he dramatically clasped my hand and whispered, "This one's going to be our best moment yet." Then he started recounting stories from our past. Not ordinary stories, but hyper-dramatized versions of events where he always emerged as heroic, and I was his loyal sidekick. I forced laughs at the exaggerations, nodding at lines that made no sense, while the others clapped at the funny anecdotes. I wanted to disappear under the campfire, but my role as his confidant left me no escape. The absolute peak of absurdity happened when he decided we should go skinny dipping in the lake at midnight. At first, I thought he was joking, but nope. He was entirely serious. He ran into the water, yelling for me to join him, while I hesitated on the shore, fully aware that the moonlight and mosquitoes would make this night one I would never forget, or survive without emotional scars. Eventually, I followed, because somehow, saying no would have destroyed the delicate balance of this friendship. Halfway in, he grabbed my arm, splashed water all over me, and declared, "We're unstoppable together. Nothing can break us." I coughed, sputtered, and silently prayed that the world would swallow me whole. Somehow, everyone else in the group thought it was hilarious, cheering him on. I smiled and played along, but my dignity was floating away in that icy lake, never to return. The next morning, I woke up freezing, covered in mud, and with every muscle screaming in protest. He, of course, was already awake, making breakfast for everyone, humming, and casually mentioning that he had planned a sunrise hike for ultimate bonding. I thought I might cry. I thought about telling him the truth, about screaming that I could not possibly keep pretending to be his enthusiastic best friend, but my voice would not cooperate. I had been trapped in this charade for so long that confrontation felt impossible. Instead, I smiled weakly, helped him pack up the campsite, and mentally drafted an apology letter that I would never send. Over the next few weeks, I reflected on that weekend, trying to process the emotional chaos. I realized that I had become not just his best friend, but his personal emotional buffer, activity coordinator, and crisis manager. Everything about our interactions required careful navigation. Every joke, every plan, every casual comment had to be weighed for potential consequences. It was exhausting, but also strangely addictive. There was a thrill in surviving the madness, in being the only person who could manage his whirlwind personality without breaking. At the same time, the guilt of deceiving someone who genuinely valued me weighed heavily. I was living a double life within a single friendship, and it was taking a toll on my mental health. Despite the exhaustion, life went on. He continued to drag me into adventures, each one more ridiculous than the last, and I kept up the act. There were small moments of joy, times when he would genuinely care for me, like remembering my favorite coffee or checking in on my mental health, but they were always overshadowed by the relentless demands of his personality. I was trapped in a cycle of loyalty, guilt, and absurdity, wondering how long I could sustain the charade before it all came crashing down. The thought of revealing the truth terrified me, because I knew the fallout could destroy the friendship entirely, and yet, continuing to lie was equally exhausting. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone relied on you so completely that you had to lie just to keep them happy? Could you endure their constant attention and enthusiasm without losing yourself, or would you finally admit the truth and risk losing them forever? It all came to a head during what he dubbed the epic summer finale, a weekend getaway he had been planning for months. I should have known better than to agree, but I didn't have the courage to say no. The plan was elaborate: a rented cabin in the woods, a bonfire, outdoor games, and, of course, a long list of activities he had choreographed down to the minute. I arrived, carrying my luggage and my carefully cultivated patience, and was immediately greeted with a whirlwind of energy. He hugged me, bouncing on his heels, and said, "This is going to be legendary. Just you wait. I've got surprises you'll never forget." I forced a grin, wishing the universe would provide an emergency escape hatch. The first day passed in a blur of hiking, canoeing, and attempting to participate in his meticulously arranged team games. Each activity was designed to strengthen our bond, which, translated into plain English, meant I had to act enthusiastic while managing his high-energy antics and the inevitable chaos that followed. At one point, he assigned me the role of strategy coordinator during a scavenger hunt. My job was to direct the group, mediate arguments, and ensure everyone stayed motivated, all while he cheered from behind me like I was some kind of genius hero. I smiled, nodded, and silently counted down the minutes until I could hide in my room. The evening, however, was where the true absurdity peaked. He had planned a massive bonfire gathering, complete with esmores, music, and an impromptu talent show. I was already exhausted, but my role as his loyal sidekick required participation. The first act involved him reciting a dramatic, over-the-top poem about friendship, in which he repeatedly praised me as the ultimate best friend anyone could ever hope for. Everyone clapped, I smiled, and my face probably hurt from holding back a combination of laughter and horror. I wanted to melt into the ground, disappear into the flames of the fire, anything, but I couldn't. I had to endure. Then came the surprise activity he had hinted at all weekend. He revealed a rowboat he had rented on the lake behind the cabin, and insisted that we all go out at night to witness the magical glow of fireflies reflected in the water. I didn't even like rowing, and I certainly didn't like being out on a lake at night with him in full dramatic mode. But off we went. He grabbed an oar, positioned himself next to me, and began narrating the entire experience in an epic cinematic tone. The stars above, the water below, and you, my dearest friend, guiding us through the darkness. I tried to keep a straight face while silently thinking about how I might fake a sudden illness or pretend to fall overboard just to escape. The absolute pinnacle of absurdity and terror occurred when he decided we should start a spontaneous trust exercise. Apparently, this involved blindfolding each other, walking along the boat, and relying entirely on each other's guidance. I reluctantly agreed, mostly because saying no would have triggered an existential speech from him about friendship and trust. I closed my eyes, held his hand, and attempted to follow his instructions. One misstep later, and I was flailing, nearly tipping the rowboat into the cold lake. He laughed with pure delight, thinking it was hilarious, while I clutched the edge, silently praying that I would survive without falling in. Somehow, I managed to regain my balance, but my dignity had been completely submerged in that moment. After we returned to shore, I found a quiet spot behind the cabin, finally allowing myself to breathe. I thought about everything that had happened over the years, every lie I had told, every forced smile, every adventure I had endured to maintain the illusion of being his devoted best friend. I realized that I had become an expert in managing someone else's life, constantly anticipating his needs, his whims, his highs and lows. And yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a strange affection that had formed, not for him exactly, but for surviving the chaos together. I had navigated years of absurdity, guilt, and frantic improvisation, and somehow I had emerged mostly unscathed. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the future. How long could I keep this up? How long before the cracks in my carefully maintained facade would become visible? I imagined telling him the truth, imagining the shock, disappointment, maybe even anger. But I also imagined the relief, the freedom of no longer pretending. Part of me wanted to confess everything, to finally unload the years of exhaustion, lies, and silent judgment. Another part feared the devastation it might cause, knowing how deeply he trusted me and how much he valued my presence in his life. And so, the secret remains. He still thinks I am his unwavering, loyal best friend, the one person he can depend on without question. I still endure his energy, his obsessive attention, and his endless plans. I still smile, nod, and laugh at jokes that aren't funny, while mentally cataloging each lie, each elaborate fabrication that keeps the friendship intact. It's exhausting, absurd, and occasionally hilarious, but for now, it works. I wonder how long I can maintain it, and whether the truth will ever surface. Will I eventually confess, or will I continue living this double life, balancing guilt and loyalty with every interaction? Only time will tell. Have you ever kept up a charade for someone's sake, hiding your true feelings to avoid hurting them? Could you endure years of absurdity, lies, and constant attention just to keep the peace? Or would you finally tell the truth and risk everything?